Hey everybody, Marcus here. In the last video, we put forward a thesis that feminist concepts such as the patriarchy emerged from the minds of a certain type of feminist. These feminists are the true believers and have motivations that are much more interesting than simply making money off of victimhood. Though making money off victimhood need not be mutually exclusive from their motivations, it is not itself the source of ideas such as the patriarchy. These true believers I have labeled as the feminist prophets. In this video, I want to put forward an account of how a feminist prophet comes into being. The question before us is as follows. What are the constituent forces that come into play in order to produce a mind that will conceive of such a thing like the patriarchy? Now, this is no easy task. I will need to lay down a lot of conceptual groundwork in order to be able to frame the question in a way that allows for an answer to emerge. So, let's get started. Before man became a human being, he first became a trusting being. Trust is the first currency of man upon which all other currencies are built. Now, let us imagine a time in the history of our species where indeed there were no differences between man and woman except one. Let us assume that every physical and mental faculty was the same, only in that woman carried and birthed children. Though I cannot know what form man and woman took in that part of history, I can posit with absolute confidence that such a time existed. Now, to verify the veracity of such a claim, we need only look at the simplest of progressions. Once, proto-humans were but a single cell that would replicate itself, asexually. This single cell, at some point in time, became a creature that began to reproduce sexually. It is at that moment in time, that moment when asexual reproduction gave way to sexual reproduction, does our account begin. Whatever form man may have taken at that time. Of all the creatures that had come from that creature, many surely became non-human, while one path became human. The path that became human was social, as humans are social creatures. Now, let us take a slight detour. In modern day, when a fire starts, brigades of 5 firemen are loaded onto a fire truck and arrive at the scene. They start setting up their equipment and take to the task of extinguishing the fire. However, sometimes there are people trapped in the burning building. In addition to this, sometimes the building is so far gone that the likelihood of rescue is minimal. There exists a gray area during such conditions. If the building is deemed to be extremely unstable with no chance of rescuing those trapped, none of the firemen will enter the building. However, sometimes the situation is extremely bad, but still a glimmer of hope for rescue exists. In such a situation, the firemen, fully aware that their life may be extinguished upon entry, make the decision to risk it and enter the building anyway. However, not all 5 enter the building. They draw straws, and those that lose enter the building, possibly never to emerge again. At some point, after proto-humans went from asexual to sexual reproduction, nature drew straws between man and woman on who would face those dangers when a choice was available. Every time that man lost the draw, the branch of proto-humans carried on. When women lost the draw, the branch died out or became something else. Now, it is important not to assume that men and women had any different mental or physical advantages at this point of the story. The evolutionary branch did not carry on when men lost because men proved better at facing the dangers. No, the branch carried on because the loss of men was not as significant as when women lost a draw. Now, let us go on a second deviation. In Hegel's work entitled The Complete Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel tells us an allegory. Now, imagine that there are 2 men fighting to enslave each other. Neither man wishes to use lethal force on the other, as doing so will not yield a slave to the victor. Imagine that one of the men wins. This man becomes the master, while the loser becomes the slave. The slave begins to serve the master. Over time, the master becomes dependent on the slave for all his daily needs, physical needs and even perhaps entertainment. As this master-slave dynamic continues into the years, the master becomes dull-witted. The master becomes detached and alienated from life itself. The master sees life only through the eyes of the slave. The slave, who is in the inferior position, is the one who becomes creative. The slave is the one who gets to make things. The slave learns to bake the bread, to build the structures, forge tools, and so on. From this, the slave falls into the more independent, masterly position, while the master falls into the slavish, dependent position. When proto-man lost the draw to women, proto-man became the slave to the female, who in turn became the master. Every branch of proto-humans that did not fall into this pattern eventually died out or became something different. Protection and provision for another is a slave's role and not one of a master. This is what man has always done for women and what women expect from men. Now, in Hegel's allegory, the slave, through learning various crafts, eventually gains independent masterly qualities. So too did proto-man gain those qualities, but unlike the slave in Hegel's allegory, the proto-man's mastery qualities were not learned skills, but evolved into the being itself. These qualities became, the superior muscle mass of men, better spatial awareness, and not surprisingly, the kind of intelligence that best resembles the nature of reality itself, namely, reason and logic. But in the beginning of this argument, I said that man became a trusting being before he became a human being. What exactly does that mean? Let us look at raising children. An infant is at the complete mercy of his parents. If parents could not be trusted to not leave their infant to the wolves, those infants would have been left to the wolves, and such a branch would have died out quickly. So, in this way, trust is developed in the child towards his parents early on simply based on the child's dependency. And this trust with one's children, like the masterly qualities, would have to become ingrained into the very fabric of one's existence. Trust, in turn, allows for the formation of every other social arrangement. When a hunting party, for example, is being formed, trust between the members is the glue that keeps the party alive. If you cannot trust a member of the party to have your back, your life ends. Now, let us look at the dynamic of trust. When a child is reared, the bond of trust will be strongest between the child and his parents. When trust is given by a child to a parent, so too is the likelihood of reciprocity from the parents. As such, the trust for blood relatives will be strongest. The trust between a parent and child, then, is the model of trust within the family. The trust within a family then becomes the model of trust for the tribe, though slightly weaker than for blood relations. Now, if this is the case, then there are a few consequences that follow from this. If your life is dependent on trust of others, and your children are the most trustworthy, then it follows that someone with a large family will have more likelihood in surviving. In addition, a betrayal of trust is tantamount to a death sentence and will be punished accordingly, either via exile or death. The betrayal of trust, as we all experience it today, is emotionally the most scarring betrayal. After all, if a betrayal is expected and one does not trust the betrayer, no emotional pain follows the betrayal. So, from this we can infer that trust is that which makes the human being a social being. Trust is what makes families strong. It's what makes tribes strong, and inevitably, it is what makes countries strong. Indeed, it is said that people need to have friends. Otherwise they exhibit all sorts of strange behaviors. It is also said that those who have dysfunctional families have trouble entering into meaningful relationships. These two phenomena speak to the trust that someone can feel towards others. As no relationship can form without trust, so too friendships cannot be formed without the ability to trust. If trust was never nurtured in the family, so too will willingness to give or receive it be weak or absent in adult life. If we say that there is a breakdown of relations between the sexes today, it's a breakdown of trust. If men and women cannot trust each other, so too no relationships between men and women will form. But we've gotten sidetracked in our argument. Now let us resume the inquiry into how a feminist prophet comes into being. In the Platonic dialogue entitled Thedo, sections 89d to 89e, we find ourselves in a prison cell where Socrates awaits his execution. He is surrounded by his closest friends. As the conversation between Socrates and his friends unfolds, a few of them begin to doubt philosophy as a whole. They see Socrates, the wisest amongst them, about to be executed. With all his wisdom, they think, he was still unable to avoid such a fate. And if Socrates can't do it, then what hope does philosophy leave us with? From this, they begin to question some of the core arguments about knowledge, that they have heard from Socrates before. They doubt the very possibility of knowledge and begin to suspect that perhaps philosophy is not really the answer. In response, Socrates says the following: "But first, there's a certain experience we must be careful to avoid, that we must not become mythologues, as people become misanthropes. There's no greater evil one can suffer than to hate reasonable discourse. Mythology and misanthropy arise in the same way. Misanthropy comes from when a man without knowledge or skill has placed great trust in someone and believes him to be altogether truthful, sound, and trustworthy. Then, a short time afterwards, he finds him to be wicked and unreliable, and this happens in another case. When one has frequently had that experience, especially with those whom one believed to be one's closest friends, then, in the end, after many blows, one comes to hate all men and to believe that no one is sound in any way at all. This is a shameful state of affairs, and obviously due to an attempt to have human relations without any skill in human affairs." Socrates is warning the reader that just as one should not hate his fellow man because they themselves were poor in judging character, they should not hate argumentation and reason, namely to partake in mythology, just because they may not be skilled enough to discern the flaws and strengths of an argument. This is a very profound insight that, will become important later in the argument. For now, however, it is important to look at misanthropy as a function of perpetual betrayal of trust due to one's distorted awareness of one's shortcomings. What Socrates is saying is that when someone is inept at socializing and inept at building trust-based relationships, she fails to adequately judge character and places trust in those she should not have, be they men or women. When in the life of such a person trust is broken as a rule, they eventually grow to see all of humanity as fallen and grow to hate humanity. So too, due to ineptitude in dealing with logical argumentation, one develops a hatred for reason itself. Now, what has been said by many people is that the radical types of feminists tend to be, fat, ugly in that unfeminine way, namely manly looking, and have a vicious disposition. Okay, this tends to be true, but it would be a cheap cop-out to simply stop the argument here and, say that feminist prophets just hate men, and there's no more to it than that. Such an argument would be as poor as blue pillars dismissing MGTOW, as a bunch of damaged, hateful men. No, the story of feminist prophets is much more interesting than that. Man-hating does not carry enough explanatory force to account for how concepts like the patriarchy emerge. Let us move on to the next stage of our argument. To do this, we must now turn to Nietzsche's work entitled On the Genealogy of Morals. There are three very important ideas contained in this work that I need to explain in order for my account of feminist prophets to make sense. The concepts in Nietzsche's work will also go a long way in explaining why feminism comes across as a religion. The first concept is master morality. The second is ressentiment. And the third is slave morality. these concepts all work together, weaving a very intricate tapestry. Now, I will need to explain all three within the same story. Now, let us imagine two moral scales. First is the scale of good and evil. Secondly, the scale of good and bad. Now, you might be thinking to yourself that these two scales are both the same as far as morality is concerned. After all, is not the concept of bad interchangeable with evil when evaluating moral actions? Well, not exactly. But before we can answer why, we must first ask the question of how these scales came into being. Let us imagine a time where brute force was still something that reigned as the arbiter of conflicts. A time when violence and death were no more uncommon phenomenon in the life of people, than television is to us now. In such a time, there would have emerged a group of warriors who, through their very martial prowess, were capable of imposing their will upon others. These warriors would have looked upon certain things as good. For example, strength was considered good, wealth was considered good, honor was considered good, and anything else expedient to these warriors. Now, it is important that when I say expedient, I do not simply mean useful. No. I mean that the preference of the warriors was what they considered good. For these men, they set the values of what was good. In turn, what became bad was the opposite of what they decided is good. If they deemed strength good, then weakness automatically became bad. If they deemed wealth good, then so in turn poverty became bad. And so this process continued. Each preference of the warrior class became that which was good. This is master morality. It is the process of defining good based on one's preferences. Now, how a warrior came to the decision of what is good is not particularly important. It was good because he said so and could enforce it. So, the nature of master morality is that it chooses what the scale of good and bad will look like. Master morality chooses what action or quality goes on which end of the scale of good and bad. It is a value-setting morality. Next, we must look at the herd. The herd is everyone who is not part of the warrior caste. They are, the common people. The herd, in turn, has the morality of the masters imposed upon them. Now, the herd do not possess master morality, of their own at least, as the herd cannot set values. The herd merely obey the morality of the warrior caste. The herd, in such a time, were no more than, de facto slaves of the warrior caste. But so too, the warriors thought themselves better than the herd, better than the common people. There was a nobility and code of conduct between equals in the warrior caste, which did not apply to their treatment of the herd. Now, what about the treatment of the herd then? Well, surely, the treatment from the warrior caste was very unpleasant to them, yet they were powerless to do anything about it. Now, most of the herd simply accepted this as a fact of life. This is, no different than the mass of people today who obey the laws and get on with life. For the most part, we acknowledge that it might not be fair that you can get away with murder if you have enough wealth and connections, but we accept it. After all, life is not fair, right? Well, what about those people who cannot resolve themselves to the life of the herd, but are not themselves of the warrior caste? What about those people who see how much better the warrior caste has it, but themselves are not good enough to be one of them? These individuals crave the power, the status, and wealth of the warrior caste, but cannot compete with the warrior caste based on the rules set by the warrior caste. Perhaps they are not smart enough, or strong enough, or beautiful, or whatever may be the case. Well, these people develop a soul sickness from their jealousy. They keep trying to join the warrior caste, but due to their lack in those qualities which would gain them access, they keep getting rejected. They begin to resent the warrior caste. This resentment grows into hatred as they realize that they will never be anything more than the herd. This realization, seems like a gross injustice to them. This sense of injustice further fuels their hatred and sparks their desire for revenge. However, they are so inept they cannot avenge themselves upon the warrior caste. Ressentiment is this very phenomenon. It is the sickness of soul that comes from a jealousy that degenerates to hatred, whereby one senses injustice to their person, but cannot enact revenge on those who are perceived as having slighted them. The people who suffer ressentiment form what Nietzsche calls the priestly caste. The priestly caste now perform a brilliant psychological trick. As the priestly caste cannot accept the idea of their own inferiority, they must externalize this failure. The priestly caste thinks to itself, if I am good, and I am not of the warrior caste, then surely the warrior caste must be evil. The hatred of the priestly caste births the scale of good and evil. But what will the vengeance of the priestly caste look like? Well, the priestly caste thinks to itself, if the warrior caste is evil, then what they value is evil as well. With this trick, the priestly caste inverts the values of the warrior caste. If the warrior caste considers wealth as good, then so wealth becomes evil. If the masters consider strength good, then so too weakness must now be good, and strength a source of evil. And this goes on for all warrior caste values. This is how slave morality is born. Slave morality takes a moral system developed through master morality and inverts it. This is how master morality, ressentiment, and slave morality relate. Those who are strong, noble, skilled, and capable initially set values, which in turn is master morality. The weak, sickly, and jealous of the herd that cannot accept their personal failures and inability to hold a candle to the values the masters set eventually succumb to ressentiment and become the priestly caste. To take revenge on the warrior caste, the priestly caste inverts the values of the warrior caste and create a slave morality. However, how is creating this slave morality going to avenge the priestly caste? Well, surely you must be asking yourself, why would anyone in the warrior caste care what a bunch of bitter members of the herd think? Well, the warrior caste indeed does not care what the priestly caste think. In fact, they don't even notice them. Now, if the priestly caste tried to impose the warrior caste this new value system, they would be laughed at. No, that won't work. The priestly caste instead teaches these new values to the herd. The herd now have a competing set of values to consider. Slowly, the priestly castes start converting ever large numbers of the herd to their slave morality. Eventually, such a large number of people come to accept this slave morality that the warrior caste grows concerned. The members of the warrior caste start to think to themselves, since so many people seem to believe these things, perhaps there's some truth in it. The tireless work in converting of the herd starts to yield results through the influence of the herd on the warrior caste. Some members of the warrior caste start to repeat the slave morality until ultimately the warrior caste starts taking instruction from the priestly caste. And in this way, the priestly caste vanquishes the values set by the warrior caste. It no longer matters that the warriors are stronger or wealthier, as now strength and wealth are not valued. Strength and wealth are now despised by everybody. The priestly caste has made their sickness, their personal failing, their ineptitude as that which is now considered good. As there will always be more failures in life than those noble, there will always be an endless pool to refill the priestly caste that tells them their personal failures are good and their opposite bad. I think that by now we can start to see some connection between what has been argued so far and feminism. But before we can continue the argument, we need to make it clear who is who in this spectacle. Who are the warrior caste? Who are the priestly caste? And who is the herd? Well, I think it is obvious that the feminist prophets are the priestly caste. The herd would be the general population. This leaves us with the warrior caste. At first, it might seem like it is men, but it's not that simple. Men and women form different dominance hierarchies within their own group. So, men form a hierarchy based on acquisition of resources, status, and power. These are things, admired in men by other men because they are useful things as well as being that which is desirable by women. As a man acquires these things, he moves up the hierarchy. As he gathers these things, he also becomes a value setter in the culture. For example, if he owns a TV network, then only the values he wishes to present will make it on the air if he so chooses. If he is a famous musician, the values in his songs influence the masses, and on and on. Some master values that govern upward motion in this hierarchy are the use of logic, competition, aggression, and so forth. Women form their own hierarchy. The hierarchy that women form is governed around youth and beauty, as this can give a woman social control over other women as well as men. I mean, why are the most popular girls the prettiest? Why are the female actresses and singers all pretty? Are these not the women who set the values for all women in the herd? Some master values that govern upward motion for women in their own hierarchy would be things like thinness, dieting, beauty care products, fashion, and so on. Now, the warrior caste composed of men would be the wealthy, the famous, and the powerful. The warrior caste composed of women would be the prettiest and youngest. Everyone else outside these groups is part of the herd. So, let us look at a feminist prophet. As we said earlier, they're usually ugly, fat, and probably old. This would keep them out of the female warrior caste. Earlier, we argued that due to the evolutionary pressures that ensued when proto-humans became sexually reproduced, men gained innate advantages due to their slave role. So this entails that these feminist prophets cannot compete against the male warrior caste. By being unable to join either male or female warrior castes, the feminist prophets suffer from ressentiment against both men and women. She inverts the values set by both warrior castes and tries to make slave morality the bar. Only by imposing slave morality onto both male and female warrior castes and overthrowing master morality will the feminist prophet be able to come out on top. From this account, a great deal of things become immediately clear. Firstly, men value logic and reason. Therefore, logic and reason are evil and must be abolished. If logic and reason are evil, then emotions, being an opposite, surely are good. And so we have women's way of knowing. As thinness is valued by the female warrior caste, then surely thinness must be evil, and therefore fatness good. Femininity is evil because it is valued by the female warrior caste. Masculinity is evil because it is valued by the male warrior caste. So what do you have feminist prophets push for? Androgyny. Family used to be good, so now it's evil. Bring on the single-parent homes. Straight sex used to be good, now it's all rape. Long live homosexuality. And, of course, lots of white people are part of the warrior caste, so whiteness, too, has become evil. One by one, each value that has been held as noble, healthy, and good by the warrior caste is being inverted. It won't stop until every single human being is as sickly, inept, and hateful as the feminist prophets, because only then will they come out on top. Now, in the last video, we left one question unanswered. Why do the feminist prophets believe that adopting lateral thinking will not yield things like racism, sexism, homophobia, and so forth? Well, now we are ready to answer this question. Under the inversion of values and adopting this new slave morality, it is impossible for racism, sexism, or homophobia to emerge because evil cannot emerge from good. Evil can only emerge from evil. As racism, sexism, and homophobia are evil, and they emerged from the patriarchy, which is also evil, and the patriarchy emerged out of vertical thinking, which is also evil, there is no possibility for these things to emerge from the opposite. Now, metaphysically, this actually makes sense. but is awfully vertical of an argument and complete nonsense in the context produced by the feminist prophets. Now, if this account of the feminist prophet is sound, then we should be able to make some predictions about what will come next. For example, pedophilia is bad under master morality, therefore it will be good under slave morality. We're already seeing the momentum for this inversion taking place. I mean, Milo Yiannopoulos is predicting the normalization of pedophilia to be the next feminist project. I myself would like to put in my own prediction. Incest is bad under master morality, so it will become good under slave morality. Signs of this inversion can already be found in older feminist texts. For example, Andrea Dworkin was pushing this idea in the 70s and 80s. Perhaps the herd was not ready for such a radical inversion then, but who knows about today or a decade from now. Now, in the next video of this series, we will look at the tools that feminist prophets use in justifying their slave morality values. Namely, we will explore how they make their arguments sound rational. Until then, thanks for listening. Go team.